We're our own worst enemy.
More than 123 million people around the world have been forced from their homes.
Every number, it has a face behind it.
Many are fleeing conflict, others persecution, and increasingly, they're also finding themselves on the front lines of a changing climate. Coming up, the overlap between displacement and a planet that's getting warmer by the year. And what happens when fleeing conflict does not mean escaping hardship.
There's no escape. There's nowhere you could go.
You're angry?
Yes, of course.
Just 2 degrees is on. Now.
So when you sit in rooms with world leaders today, do you get the sense they truly understand?
According to them, so what? Okay, we can do it next year, we can do it the other year. Because they prolong it and they don't act towards it.
In late June, the governments of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda, together with the UN Refugee Agency, reaffirmed their commitment to support the voluntary, safe and dignified return of thousands of refugees.
I don't usually like starting this program with images of politicians and officials, but these pictures matter because behind every successful refugee return are years of diplomacy, humanitarian support, and countless people working to give families the chance to go home.
Also in June, the world marked World Refugee Day. That's a day dedicated to people forced to flee violence, conflict, persecution and human rights abuses. Today, more than 123 million people around the world are living in displacement. That's the highest number ever recorded. To put that into perspective, if all displaced people formed a country, it would be one of the largest nations on the planet. And despite what many people think, most refugees don't travel halfway around the world. The vast majority remain close to home, often in neighboring countries that are already dealing with economic, political or environmental challenges of their own.
Parce que si nous voyons les soins n'existent pas ici. Les conditions de vie, les toilettes n'existent pas dans les poubelles sont remplies, les toilettes sont remplies. Il n'y a pas d'argent. Si vous entrez dans les toilettes, on peut rentrer aussi avec d'autres maladies de là et on peut revenir avec ça dans votre maison et vous pouvez contaminer facilement votre famille.
Countries such as Syria, Afghanistan, Ukraine and Myanmar continue to drive some of the world's largest displacement crises. Meanwhile, neighbouring countries have absorbed millions of people seeking safety from conflict and instability. Nyakuma Nial fled her home in South Sudan's Nirol County, one of the areas facing an increased risk of famine after violence erupted in her community. For decades, displacement was largely viewed through the lens of war and persecution, but increasingly, another crisis is shaping the lives of displaced communities: climate change. Last year alone, disasters linked to weather, climate and water hazards triggered millions of new internal displacements. Droughts are lasting longer, floods are becoming more destructive, and heat waves are pushing temperatures to dangerous levels across many parts of the globe.
Global warming doesn't usually meet the legal definition of a refugee claim on its own. It's increasingly acting as a threat multiplier by worsening food insecurity, increasing competition over scarce resources, undermining livelihoods and deepening existing vulnerabilities.
فصل صيف شوب ما في مروحة تبرد فيها الأولاد إذا بدك كنت على الولد سطل المي يعني ما بيتم عندك للمسة تشرب مي.
The connection is becoming impossible to ignore. According to the UNHCR, more than 3/4 of the world's displaced people now live in countries highly exposed to climate-related hazards. Many of the countries hosting large refugee populations are also among those least equipped to cope with rising temperatures, droughts, floods, and water shortages. In some cases, people who've already fled one crisis are forced to confront another. A family escaping conflict may arrive in a community already struggling through severe drought, or a refugee settlement may be hit by devastating floods. The result is a growing overlap between two defining challenges of our time: displacement and the climate crisis. And yet, despite being on the front lines of climate impacts, displaced communities often receive only a small fraction of global climate finance and adaptation funding.
La situación de los migrantes y refugiados exige una respuesta que mire a las personas, afronte las causas que las obligan a partir y vaya más allá de la mera gestión de flujos. De ahí nace una doble exigencia de justicia social: ofrecer vías seguras y legales, una acogida respetuosa y posibilidades reales de integración, y promover al mismo tiempo el derecho a permanecer en la propia tierra, trabajando para que nadie tenga que abandonar su hogar por falta de paz, seguridad o condiciones dignas de vida, por las desigualdades económicas y los efectos de la crisis climática.
As another World Refugee Day comes and goes, the connection between displacement and planetary heating is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Across some of the world's most vulnerable regions, conflict, displacement and climate impacts are converging, creating new challenges for millions of people already struggling to rebuild their lives. And as these crises become more deeply intertwined, it just isn't possible to address one without addressing the other.
I'm showing our viewers here about the UNHCR's report at 123 million displaced people. Many will hear just another big number and I guess move on. Can you help us understand what 123 million actually means? Like, what does that number look like when you see it through the eyes of a displaced mother or child?
So by end of 2025, the world record the 118 million forced displaced people across the world. As you rightfully said, that this number is huge, but also we have to remember that every number, it has a face behind it. That a mother who walk several days carrying her two child over a few days across the border with nothing to flee the conflict and the violence in their country to seek safety. And it is very important this year, particularly because we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of 1951 Refugee Convention, which created after the Second World War. And this is a reminder that why the convention still matters, why the right to seek safety and asylum for those 118 million people still matters.
Let's look at Sudan for a minute, which is one of the world's largest displacement crises, if not the largest. I believe there are more than 14 million people who've been displaced, but it often receives very little international attention compared to other conflicts. What does that say about which human tragedies the world chooses to see and the ones we choose to ignore?
You're right about Sudan being the largest displacement crisis at the moment, with the 14 million people, Sudanese people displaced, including 4 million who choose to cross the border to neighboring country. And when you look into the Sudan context, and you look into the neighboring country who are hosting 4 million Sudanese refugees, Chad, South Sudan, they're also going through the conflict or difficulty in their country. And then the important, the figure that I want to put is like 68% of those people are actually in neighboring country. We're hearing a lot that a lot of people crossing the Mediterranean to go to the wealthy country, but it's not true. A lot of people, a lot of refugees choose to stay nearby their home, and then they are wishing to return. And then also that there is, unfortunately, a lot of crisis over the world. We're talking about Afghanistan, Ukraine, the Democratic Republic of Congo. All those crises that having the human suffering behind should have equal spotlight and equal support from international community.
Your organization's latest climate report says there are millions of people who are living in areas that are highly exposed to climate hazards. How significant a challenge is this becoming for the UNHCR compared with, say, 10 years ago?
The number is a significantly increased. When we're talking about last year, the number dropped a little bit, but when we're talking about the 10 years ago, the number doubled. We're talking about the 60 million the displaced population 10 years ago, and now we're looking at almost 120 million. So it means that there is a lot of protracted crisis, that those who fled the crisis in their country 10 years ago, probably they are still in the same situation and that refugee setting, meaning that they haven't found a solution to their displacement. And that's why we are calling the international community that first, that we have to find the peace so that they are able to return their country. And also, because this protracted situation continues, that we have to also find a solution where they are in their asylum country. And we have to continue to support the host community and country to include refugee in their national systems.
These people have really been traumatized, fled carnage, fled the most brutal of all wars. Yet to retain that spirit, that generosity, that affirmation of life is really overwhelming.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Eugene, the US is not part of the 1951 Refugee Convention, which is problematic, particularly now. The US seems to be creating its own rules when it comes to the treatment of refugees who are fleeing all sorts of conditions. They have no control over themselves. How much of a damper is the US policy placing on the UNHCR's work?
We are 100%, and also the convention recognizes the sovereignty of the state to manage their border and then system inside. But also that, as I mentioned, that the convention, Refugee Convention, is the promise from a different state to say that this is a safety net for everyone. That might also happen maybe for European after the Second World War. That is based on the promise that it can happen to anyone. So it protected now for some refugees that are far away from your home, but it also protects all of us tomorrow. And that is important fact that we have to remember, that no one chooses to be refugees.
Since President Trump's first term, he's contributed to changing the global perspective of who a refugee is and what his or her worth is. He's used disparaging words and names to describe individuals from global south countries in particular. And we've seen that rhetoric spread, where people seem to feel empowered to publicly discriminate against refugees. How is the UNHCR addressing the idea that a refugee has diminished worth?
Surprisingly, that 68% of refugees are staying in neighboring country, and a very much same percentage of them are staying in the mid and low income countries. When you mentioned that global south, so they tend to stay in neighboring country, and those neighboring country show that amazing solidarity and generosity toward those refugees. And then they understand the concept of the convention, concept of displacement, and then they are welcoming, and then they open the door. And of course that the support, the financial support toward the hosting country is important, but also that the narrative toward the refugee and asylum seeker has to be also in line with the convention.
Thank you, Eugene. It was really nice meeting you and chatting with you. As we mentioned earlier, Sudan isn't just the world's largest displacement crisis. It's also one of the clearest examples of how conflict and climate pressure can overlap. For many people, displacement is a statistic. I call up Grace Dorong, who is originally from South Sudan and was born during a time of civil war, then spent part of her childhood at a refugee camp in Kenya. Today, she's a humanitarian and founder of the organization Root of Generations, which works with vulnerable communities affected by conflicts and climate-related challenges. Grace, I understand you grew up in Kenya at the Kaluma refugee camp. Was there a moment as a child when you realized that your life was different from other children your age?
This was the time when we reached Kakuma, and we were in this situation where there was no food, there was no water, and it was so bare, so dry. And then we were thinking, like, what is the next? So I could see the elder people, looking around for water. And then I was like, so it means that we're just trapped here. We can't find an alternative to a place where there is water. And then once in a while, the conflict could break out in these camps. And then you could see people being killed. You could see people just surrounded there, and you see misery in the eyes of people. So it looks like it was just that confined area that there's no escape. Like there's nowhere you could go. So as a child, we have this fear where we just have to keep and looking around. And even in those plastic houses, you people sleep actually with one eye open. But as a child, what kept me awake was the hunger, the lack of food, and also the fear of what is next, because we are told, you don't belong here. So this is a temporary house you're in, and anytime you will be moving, but to where? Literally, you don't know where is the next. So it looks like really from the frying pan into the fire.
Wow, that is a stunning story. It gives meaning to something you said, that refugees have no escape. You flee in one direction, you're met with danger. You flee in another direction, you're met with another danger. Can you tell me about a moment in your life when you realized there was no safe direction left to escape to?
It feels like in a paper to them, because you're telling a story to someone who has never experienced it. So to them, it doesn't look realistic that someone can be confined, or someone goes without food, or someone bleeding and has no hospital, or someone, as a child, running into the night without a hand of a parent leading you, or as a child surviving, for example, a scorpion or a snake bite alone, struggling where to go. So this looks like a story in the paper to them, and it's like, is it realistic? But this is exactly why a refugee stands to speak on behalf of other refugees. And actually, that is one of the reasons why I had to become one of the leaders to speak about this, because this you've lived there, you know what it means. It's not a story, it's a reality.
I'm sure the majority of us hearing this could not imagine what that must have been like for you. Grace, when you sit in rooms with world leaders today, do you get the sense they truly understand what it feels like to have nowhere to go?
No, I feel that they don't, because they have not experienced. And if they do, it will not just be something spoken and no action. Because a person who has experience, or people who are actually living in those situations, people from these countries that are facing this climate change would act, or they actually would act instead of speaking or writing those things in the papers. So sometimes you feel like you're talking to people who really don't get it. They don't get what you're saying. It's like when you go to COP, you speak and we come back again next year to COP and nothing has happened. So it looks like they just, because they don't know what it means realistically. When I say I lost the inner skin of my foot just because the heat was too much in Kakuma, and the whole of my leg had to peel off, and it took me months to recover to be able to step down again. Just because you don't have shoes and you're moving in the hot, scorchy sunshine. And when you're speaking that we need the climate to be prioritized in the world, people don't get it. But okay, they're discussing about it, but so what? According to them, so what? Okay, we can do it next year, we can do it the other year. we can do it the other year, because they prolong it and they don't act towards it.
You're angry.
Yes, of course. Because there's children now who still having the same struggle that I have. There are people now who are sleeping hungry. There are people now who have dry lips and barefoot and all this in the camps who are struggling. So I'm angry because we don't take action. We don't feel that these people deserve the safety and dignity as you who is living in the well-developed country. So it's not one person issue, it is our concern. If one person is struggling, if one person doesn't have water, one person doesn't have food, and then it is our concern. It is everyone's concern. Yeah.
Before I let you go, Grace, I'm curious about how people resettle, really. You spent much of your life thinking about displacement and belonging in particular. When you hear the word home today, what does it mean to you?
Home to me means a place where I can sleep deeply, where I can eat. I have water, I have education around, I have the hospital, and I don't have to be woken up by the sound of the guns. I have to sleep and wake up like any other person in any other country. That's home, where every person life is guaranteed, where safety for me, it is just me having the food, having the sound mind, not to have to hear a lot of gunshots, or having water on the table. That's home. Having security around to take care of me, not me to suffer and cry. That's home. Where my life or my dignity is being respected. That's what I call home. If the refugee camp can offer this, then that's home too. Yes.
Grace, I really feel fortunate to have met you. Thank you for sharing your story. Meanwhile, humans are not the only ones forced to adapt to a changing planet. As temperatures rise, some animals are also being forced from their normal habitats. For one small mountain dweller in North America, the challenge is to move higher or risk disappearing altogether. And that's our show. Until next time, bye.